Welcome back to the Kino Cave, everybody, and today the Kinospective is back, and we are fast on our way to finishing Phase 1 of the MCU with the Avengers, but first we have to talk about the First Avenger, Captain America. Now, I have always enjoyed Captain America as a character. I know what you're all probably thinking at this point, does this guy just love everything? Because I sung my praises about Tony Stark as a character and Bruce Banner as a character and even Thor. But with Captain America, I never loved him in the way that I loved the previous characters that I've spoken about in the Kinospective series. He felt like Superman to me always in that sense, and I liked Superman as well, but never really loved him in the way that I loved the kind of more, I was going to say more interesting, but that feels dismissive. I have good friends who love Captain America and have very good reason for loving Captain America, but I just never was into him in the way that I was with characters like Spider-Man or Hulk or Daredevil. I think I like my characters to have a bit of a darkness and a relatability to them rather than them being kind of this example to reach. So, Captain America, I've always liked but never loved his character. But I have always loved his movies. So, before we get into my review, as always, let's talk about the behind the scenes information on Captain America, the First Avenger. So, let's talk about one of the biggest talking points when it comes to this film, and definitely one of the biggest concerns that Kevin Feige had from the get-go, which was making the transformation from skinny Steve to buff Steve believable. They thought of using a few different methods. One was the Castaway method. For those of you who don't know, Castaway was a Rob Zemeckis film from the late 90s, I believe, with Tom Hanks, where he gets stranded on an island, and Tom Hanks, when he's in regular civilization, not on the island, is kind of regular Tom Hanks, kind of on the bigger side and that kind of thing. But obviously, when he's stranded on the island and has no food, he's very, very skinny. And what they did there was they filmed the scenes where he's not on the island, and then they had to take a break for him to either lose or gain the weight. I can't remember what order they filmed it in, but they had to have him go on this weight journey to then film the scenes on the island when he's supposed to be very skinny. But this is obviously time consuming and very difficult, especially for a character like Captain America, who's a superhero. And that would mean that Chris Evans would have to basically eat nothing and not exercise for months at a time, and then immediately start eating a lot and exercising. Easy task for Christian Bale. For Chris Evans, let's not put him through that. They also thought of skinnying Steve down using entirely CGI, but they decided that the technology wasn't quite there yet. Some advice that maybe some future Marvel films could maybe borrow. So they landed on a combination of methods, but the main one was to film the scenes with Chris Evans and then film the exact same scenes with an actor of a more appropriate body type for skinny Steve. That actor was named Leander Dini. So what would happen most often is Chris Evans would do a take as himself, pretending to be skinny Steve. Leander Dini would watch it a few times over, study it, get the exact mannerisms down right, and then they would film the scenes again with Dini, copying Chris Evans's exact movements and mannerisms in the scene, so that way they could literally swap out Dini's head with Chris Evans's. They would often even use 3 different takes of the same shot, one with Chris Evans, one with Dini, and one with absolutely no actor in the shot at all, so that the CGI artists had complete coverage. They had the take with Chris Evans so you could see his facial expressions, you had the take with Dini so you have the body, and then you have a take with just the background so you can futz around and mess around with the background of the shot. This is brilliant, right? Like, I love this. It's not just filming with a guy in a green morph suit and then expecting the CGI artists to be able to create nothing, like create an entire scene out of nothing. Again, this is a thing that future Marvel movies would not do. I know I bring this up a lot when I talk about the MCU, but it is important. It's important not just for the quality of the film, but also just for the, basic mental states of the artists that are working on these, treating them with the basic respect that they deserve to be treated with. And of course, then when you do that, it results in a better film at the end of it. Skinny Steve is seamless, like almost entirely. There are a few shots where you can see the seams a little bit, but they pass you by so quickly that it's incredible. Even when he has fight scenes as Skinny Steve, it is seamless. They would even occasionally use CGI to thin out Chris Evans' face, because obviously Chris Evans is bulking up at this point to be Captain America, and he's all buff and huge. And when you eat appropriately to get that big, your face will also expand and get bigger. And so they would have to use CGI to just thin out his face so that his face matches his body and he doesn't look like a bobblehead. This CGI was so seamless, actually, that when Kevin Feige would show some of the test footage to, like, filmmaker buddies and, different people that he was consulting on the film, they would ask him how they used CGI to add muscles onto Chris Evans later on in the film. And he would have to explain that it's the other way around, that they would film the scenes with Chris Evans and then shrink him down. Captain America is not the only person in this film who needed a bit of practical and CGI touch-ups in this film, because of course we also have Red Skull. So Red Skull was done using mostly prosthetics. They wanted him to look scary and intimidating like he does in the comic books. They really wanted to pay as much homage to those comic books as possible, translate what was on the page to what's on the screen in terms of the red face. And Hugo Weaving was apparently the first choice to play Red Skull, and he was attracted to the role because he found it fascinating to play a character that was looking for something beyond the worldly possessions of, say, political power or armed forces or weapons or anything like that. He wanted to play a character that wanted for something godly. And they filmed the first half of the movie with Hugo Weaving's actual face so that they could set up the reveal of the Red Skull face. And this is because the filmmakers wanted the audience to find him interesting outside of the fact that he's got a big red face. They wanted Johann Schmidt to be an interesting character outside of that, so that when that reveal comes, it's just adding a little spice, a little flavor to that. So the makeup artist for Red Skull's prosthetics was David White, and he had a lot of different processes when it comes to applying the prosthetics. He wanted to use very thin prosthetics, that would adhere to the skin very tightly, because you have to believe that Hugo Weaving's real face, his human face, would fit over the Red Skull face as a mask. So I wanted those prosthetics to be as tight and thin as possible and really adhere to Weaving's face. Now, they did use a little bit of CGI here and there on Red Skull's face. The obvious one is the nose. They blacked out his nose in the film so that the CGI artist could just come in and remove it, and so that it looks like a skull face. Little touch-ups as well, things like just thinning it out a little bit, thinning out where the prosthetics would have to be a little bit bulkier in order to, fit on Hugo Weaving's face. Also, when you turn his neck, you might see folds in the prosthetics. They would use CGI to remove that so that it doesn't break the illusion of it being his skin. And little things like making his eyes a little bit more sunken in and his cheeks a little bit more sunken in, just to, again, enhance that believability that this is his face and then he's wearing Hugo Weaving's face over that. And moving on to the more story-oriented aspect of the film, Kevin Feige and company wanted to pay as much homage to the original Captain America comics from the 1940s, from wartime, as possible. So that then led to them deciding to put in Bucky and the Howling Commandos. For those of you who don't know, the Howling Commandos were a team of sort of just unique resistance fighters during World War II in the comic books. In comic books in the 1940s, superheroes were all about fighting Hitler and joining the war effort and making sure that everybody was on board with stopping the Nazis. So a lot of comic books would have wartime stuff in it. That obviously led to Captain America existing, and in his very first issue, punching Adolf Hitler in the face on the cover. which is so cool. And so, of course, kids and even some adults would also want to attach themselves to a band of soldiers fighting the Nazis during the war to inspire people. And even adult soldiers who were fighting the war would get comic books in their care packages as entertainment reading, which is, again, just really cool that this kind of thing was happening. You know, there's not much that you can say about World War II that was cool, but the fact that soldiers were sent comic books as a little morale boost, and the comic books would depict people like them fighting for justice, that's just really sweet in my mind. And of course, there is Bucky, who was Captain America's kid sidekick. In 1940, when Robin came on the scene as Batman's sidekick and Batman sales skyrocketed, everybody needed a kid sidekick by their side. And of course, what's a more inspiring figure to you little kids during the war than a little soldier, a little like 10-year-old soldier following Captain America into battle by the name of Bucky. However, not everybody was so enthused about that idea of Bucky being this little kid following around Captain America, namely Sebastian Stan. Sebastian Stan did not want to be a kid sidekick. He didn't want to be a Robin to Captain America's Batman. But what attracted him to the role was some of the more recent comic books modernizing Bucky a little bit. He's not a child going to fight in World War II anymore. Bucky is an adult man, maybe slightly younger than Captain America, but he is sort of Captain America's number one guy. He's second in line, and he would do some of the dirty work for Captain America, because Captain America is this soldier with the star on his chest and the shield, and he's got to present a certain image to the public. So Bucky does the shadier shit. He will, you know, take out a few people that maybe Captain America doesn't want to be seen murdering and that kind of thing. He was, he's sitting in the sidelines, you know, taking care of business, while Captain America is out there throwing his shield about. As for Captain America's look in the film, Ryan Meinerding, I heard them pronounce it Meinerding in the behind the scenes, so I'm going to go with Meinerding. Ryan Meinerding is on the scene. If you're a long-time viewer of this channel, then you will know from my Costuming Chronicles series about pretty much any Marvel character, Ryan Meinerding is basically the design consultant for the MCU. He pretty much designs every single character in concept art. He is kind of a middleman between the Marvel Comics design side of things and the MCU. He is Kevin Feige's right-hand man in terms of designing characters. So I imagine as the MCU series progresses from this point forward, you're going to start hearing Meinerding's name a lot. Now, Meinerding wanted the Captain America costume to feel like it fit the time period while also paying homage to the original comic books. He wanted them to obviously have the color scheme and the pattern of the blue with the red and white stripes and the star on the chest and the A on the helmet. He also wanted it to feel like a period accurate soldier's uniform. He wanted it to feel like Captain America could have actually existed and could have been fighting alongside the Allies during World War II. So you can see that in terms of the material, definitely, and some of the straps on Captain America's suit. And, you know, the pants are just kind of cargo pants, and he's got the kind of classic wartime belt and that kind of thing. Look, I'm not going to pretend I know anything about World War II, really. I'm not a big World War II guy. I find it fascinating, but I've just never really sunk my teeth into it. So if I sound like I'm talking out of my ass, it's because I am. To me, it definitely looks like it reflects the World War II uniforms of the era based on what I know. I just feel like there's a lot of World War II history nerds that are going to come into my comment section and tell me that I don't know anything. And you'd be right about that. But I do know about Captain America, so let's move on. For Captain America's shield, they did a very similar thing that we did with Thor's hammer in my previous Kinospective video, so check that one out. I'm quite proud of that one, actually. I quite like that Thor video. So go check that out. But also, for the Captain America shield, they created a rubber shield for action scenes that Chris Evans could bonk Nazis on the head with. They also created a metal shield for hero shots and close-ups, so that it would actually be shiny and you could put scuff marks on it and things like that. So that was the shield that, you know, you wanted to look at. And then they would just have a fully CGI shield, because this is a weapon that Captain America would throw. And Chris Evans even developed his own kind of throwing style for the shield, because comic books are a 2D still image medium, so you have to adapt it the way he throws the shield. And Chris Evans developed that himself. They kind of just let him run with it, and then the CGI artists come in and just put the shield in where his hand is and send it off in whatever direction Chris Evans decided to throw it in. So they would use a fully CGI shield for that, obviously, because this is supposed to be a metal that doesn't actually exist in our world, and it's supposed to be ultra absorbent and bouncy and things like that. So yeah, some CGI is required. Also, the shield would sometimes have a magnet on the inside, so that when Chris Evans needs to put the shield on his back, he doesn't have to go messing around looking for a strap or anything like that. It just has a little magnet so that he can put it on his back, and then it just attaches to his back, which, yeah, clever. As for some of the other weapons and vehicles in the film, some of the more advanced tech, because obviously Johann Schmidt has discovered the Tesseract, I think it is. God, Marvel is so complicated. He's discovered the Tesseract, which is actually an Infinity Stone, but you don't find that out till later. So it's this ancient magic technology, I guess, that he has infused his own tech with. So they obviously have to design all of that from scratch. And what they did was they wanted the weapons and that to feel like it could have been made from parts that existed in the 1940s. Instead of just making it modern or sci-fi, they wanted it to feel like, well, if somebody in wartime in the 1940s during World War II, if they were going to make a weapon that they could then infuse with energy from a magic cube, what would they make? And I think what they settled on is really, really cool. And they did a similar thing with Johann Schmidt's car, this big, bulky, Batmobile-sized car. They wanted it to feel like it could be driven through parades, but also then taken off-road at a moment's notice to go into battle, which I think is also really, really cool. And that is it for the behind-the-scenes information. I hope that was interesting to a lot of you guys. I think the skinny Steve to buff Steve stuff is really, really fascinating. And without further ado, let's get into my review of Captain America, the First Avenger. So, like with my Iron Man video, I found it difficult to actually think of something interesting to say about Captain America, because everybody's talked about Captain America at this point. That's my main issue with doing these MCU reviews, is that I'm finding it hard to find something unique to talk about, but I hope I found little nuggets of information. Information? I don't know, opinions, I guess. I hope I found little nuggets of my opinions that hopefully you will find interesting. Something that maybe you haven't heard before 1,000 times. Anyway, let's talk about it. I've always loved the filmmaking in this movie. Of course, I talked about a lot of the CGI work and the practical elements of it, but also things like the score. Alan Silvestri is one of the greats, right? Like, Back to the Future, obviously, is an iconic theme, and I really love his music for A Christmas Carol, the Jim Carrey animated one. That's one for a hot takes video, I guess, but I love the score from that movie specifically. I think it's brilliant. And also, I mean, the Avengers theme. He was obviously brought back to do the Avengers and Avengers Infinity War and Endgame as well. And of course, his Avengers theme is probably the most iconic piece of film music of the 21st century. I can't think of anybody who wouldn't recognize the sound of it, but... So yeah, Alan Silvestri is of course one of the greats, and his Captain America theme is also fantastic. It feels appropriate to the era, but also feels heroic in its own way. So, amazing. And of course, this Captain America suit, his costume, it is the second best one, I think. Second only to literally the exact same one, but with an added red stripe. Otherwise, this is still my favorite Captain America costume. Again, the one with the red stripe just edges it out because it's got a red stripe. And once you've seen the one with the red stripe, the one without the red stripe looks a little bit naked. But the colors and the textures on the costume are perfect. It doesn't feel too bright, but it also doesn't feel like washed out and grey. The textures are just perfect. I don't think you need the fish scale thing that they have in the comic books. Just having a nice texture on that would works absolutely perfectly, and it's not yet been MCU-ified, which I'm sure we will get to, and when I do more Costuming Chronicles videos for MCU characters, we will talk about that more. But it's not got the same pitfalls that a lot of future MCU and a lot of future Captain America costumes would have. On to some of my other praises about this movie. The relationship between Steve and Peggy is probably the best in the MCU, which is crazy because it's all in this movie, save for a couple of scenes in a couple of future movies. They really try to shoehorn that relationship back into Endgame so that they can wrap it up. But the relationship between Steve and Peggy in this movie is just great. The chemistry between Chris Evans and Haley Atwell is just perfect. And also, I think the reason why this is probably the best relationship in the MCU is just that final scene between them when Steve makes a date with Peggy, a date that he knows he'll never be able to show up for. And then when he wakes up 70 years in the future, which is then our present day, just that final line of, I had a date. And just the sadness of that, it gets me every single time. Like, he doesn't need to like burst into tears or fall down crying. You just need to, Chris Evans just looking just beyond the camera and just saying that he had a date. And there's so much weight behind that line delivery. I love it. On to something about this movie that's not so good. This will be no surprise to anybody. Anybody who talks about this movie will say it, but I may as well say it myself because I don't want to come across like I love everything in this movie. I just kind of want to find an interesting thing that I do like about it or dislike. But there's nothing interesting that I do dislike about it. The things that I don't like about this movie is the same thing that everybody else does, and that's the third act. Everything from when Red Skull is got his little champagne glass and about to execute his plan to blow up the world or whatever. Everything from there right up until Red Skull gets sucked up into the sky by the Tesseract. All of that is just a little bit boring, and I didn't want to just say it's boring because it's just action and all that kind of thing. I wanted to, diagnose why. Why is the third act so boring? And it's because Red Skull and Captain America do not have that much drama between them. Like, if you look at, say, Spider-Man 2, one of the greatest superhero movies ever made, there's so much drama between Peter and Otto. Because Otto was like a mentor figure to him. He's also, being corrupted by the robotic arms and the AI in the arms. And Peter is constantly trying to appeal to Doc Ock, his human side. The side that Peter knew and admired from earlier on in the film. Tons of drama, right? Or if you go with characters that don't know each other very well, like, say, one of the other best superhero movies ever made, The Dark Knight. Batman and Joker don't know each other very well. They don't know each other at all. Joker doesn't know who Batman is, and nobody knows who the Joker is. Despite what everyone online will tell you, it's not incredibly obvious that he used to be a World War II veteran. That's a theory. It's a very good theory with a lot of reasoning behind it, but it is meant to be ambiguous. Point is, Batman and Joker do not know each other, but they have been constantly at odds, and they have constantly come against each other throughout the film, and there is so much tension built up between them over the course of the film that when it comes to that crescendo in the construction building, you feel that drama between them, and it's a philosophical drama. Captain America and Red Skull, well, Cap's fighting for the Allies and Red Skull is fighting for the Nazis, although he's this secret super Nazi now, and Captain America is, of course, fighting against that because he hates bullies. And Captain America's kind of completed his arc. He doesn't need to beat Red Skull to complete his arc as a character. He has become full-form Captain America at this point. He has won the heart of Peggy Carter. So all we really need to do is wrap this up with a big punch-out on a, flying ship that looks like a boomerang. And Red Skull is a pretty interesting and really cool character on his own. But when you're talking about the drama between him and Captain America, there isn't much other than they came from the same serum and it corrupted one and not the other. And don't get me wrong, I love the line when Red Skull asks what made Captain America so special and Steve says, nothing, I'm just a kid from Brooklyn. That's great. That is a great wrap-up but again, it just falls flat slightly and is a little bit boring. And Marvel has kind of a trend of a third act problem where third acts are just punch ups and final action sequences and not really associated with the completion of a character arc or the resolution of any drama between the villains and the heroes. So we will get into that more as we talk about more films from the MCU, but yeah, I hope that explains why the third act is so underwhelming for so many people. It's all to do with conflict resolution between the hero and the villain and the completion of a character arc, which doesn't happen in this movie, which would be fine if there was more conflict resolution between Captain America and Red Skull, but it really just comes down to a chase sequence and a punch out. Now, I didn't want to end on a negative, so let's talk about one thing about Captain America that is going to be interesting to talk about in a YouTube video, but we'll see. A movie called Captain America comes out in a world where Captain America is a known superhero, but not famous enough in the way that Superman or Batman or the Hulk or Spider-Man are. Can be a hard sell because America, especially post 9/11, is not quite the squeaky clean golden child that it kind of presented itself as and continues to present itself as, besides being all kinds of fucked up now and even small, like not small, but even, you know, kinds of fucked up back in 2011. And Jesus. Look, the world's in a grim state at the moment, and I'm not going to dwell on the problems of the world and specifically with America too much, but you kind of have to talk about it in a video series about Captain America of all characters, so I'm sure I'll circle back to this in Winter Soldier and possibly in Civil War as well. But I'm not going to dwell on this kind of thing too much because I want this to be an entertaining video, not a horribly depressing one. I guess to just make my stance clear, fuck Donald Trump and all of that, and get him out of here, and let's just leave it at that. Alright, there's my stance made clear. If you have a problem with that, go argue with a wall. You're not going to change my mind. The dude's a monster, okay? Now, let's get into Captain America in 2011, because it was a hard sell, I imagine, to sell the world on a character called Captain America around this time. You know, the war on terror was still going on. It was like about to be wrapped up. I did a little bit of my research on American politics before I got into this. But the world isn't too happy with America, right? At this point. Post 9/11, the world got a lot more cynical about things like, you know, American politics and policies and that kind of thing, and people started to examine how do you make a movie called Captain America during this time? Well, you said it in the 1940s when America was clearly the good guy. There was no room for error. America joined the war, maybe a little late, but they joined it and helped win it. So there we go. They're the good guys, definitely. You cannot argue about that. And I think that was a genius move by Kevin Feige. He might have just done it to homage the original Captain America comic books and talk about that. And obviously Steve, being a character who fought in World War II, got trapped in the ice and then woke up in the present day, has been a thing that was done in the comic books when Captain America fell out of popularity and then fell back into popularity. Either way, even if it was accidental and not intentional, I think it was a great idea to have Captain America be set in the 40s. And of course, where do you go from there? You get a director who is used to playing in that old kind of classic 1930s, 40s superhero style, Joe Johnston. So we establish Steve Rogers' motives and morality and values in this film not as being fight for America, but fight the bullies to protect the bullied. That's what's always worked about Captain America, and that's what works for him in future films then when he is brought into the present day, into a more cynical world where America is not clearly the good guy. Because sometimes America is the bully, and even though he is wearing the American flag, sometimes you have to fight back against America to protect the bullied. And that's something I'll talk about more in Captain America the Winter Soldier. It's a major theme in that film. So let's stick with this film for now. During Steve's most heroic scene in the film, this idea is made clear that he's not fighting for America, he is fighting bullies to protect the bullied and protect the downtrodden and protect the innocent. His most heroic scene in the film, I think most people will agree with, is when he saves Bucky and the Howling Commandos from the little prison that they've been put in Berlin. And he directly disobeys orders. Tommy Lee Jones says that, oh, by the way, I saw a tweet that said that now Captain America, the First Avenger, has 2 Harvey Dent actors in it because Sebastian Stan is playing Harvey Dent. That's so funny. Anyway, Tommy Lee Jones tells Steve not to go after them. They're probably dead, and if not, then they will be soon, and it's not worth risking more people to go in and save them. But Steve directly disobeys those orders, disobeys America's orders, basically, because that's his direct superior, and he goes after them anyway and rescues them. And then you get that great bit when they come back and, you know, they're all like disheveled and stuff, and you get that great Captain America theme playing. And it's Steve's most heroic scene, in my opinion anyway. It's the scene that makes you feel the most like Steve is a hero. And that's because he directly disobeys his superior's orders and disobeys the orders of the American government and the American military and goes after what he believes in, which is saving people. This is also the first time in the film that he actually declares himself Captain America. Before that, he was doing the shows and all that, but he never called himself Captain America. He had a group of singers and dancers behind him declaring him Captain America. But he never actually said it himself. The first time he says that he is Captain America is when he saves Bucky and the Howling Commandos, and they ask who he is, and he proclaims that he is Captain America and that he's knocked out Adolf Hitler like 200 times. It was so funny. But anyway, if nothing else, that's the cementation of his... Cementation? Is that even a word? That cements himself as the hero Captain America. And of course, this is not just to do with the writing or the creative direction, this is also to do with Chris Evans. If he didn't play this character with the softness and empathy that he does, then it could come off as this kind of macho Ubermensch fighting for American values. But because Chris plays it with such empathy, that makes you trust this person. On a budget of $140 million, this film made $370.5 million at the box office. A tidy little return, maybe not as much as I expected, since we are building our MCU here, but the box office for the next movie is going to be interesting and going to be very impressive. So, and that is the review section of Captain America, the First Avenger. And I didn't talk about it much, but when I talked about Thor, I said I was surprised that the Avengers is on the way and they don't talk about it as much in the behind the scenes or reference it as much in the movie. But this is Avengers City. It's in the title. We've got Tony Stark's dad in this movie. We're setting up S.H.I.E.L.D. We're setting up, obviously, Nick Fury is at the end. And even the post-credit scene for this film is a trailer for the Avengers. So we're fully in setup Avengers City here. And of course, the next video is going to be the Avengers. Obviously, there'll be a bit of a break. I'll do a different video. A bit of a shorter one because I'm going on holidays. But the video after the next video is going to be my retrospective on the Avengers. And that is going to be an interesting one. So stick around for that. Please, guys, subscribe if you liked this and want to see more from the Kino Cave. And like this video if you liked it. Comment below, what do you think of Captain America, the First Avenger? Does it hold up all these years later? 15 years, actually, I just realized that. And comment how you've been feeling about the Kinospective series so far. I hope you guys are excited to hear me talk about the Avengers. It's going to be a big one. So, have a good day, everybody. I'll see you in the movies.